Hi, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon to Yael in Tel Aviv. This is Jeremy Benamy, president of J Street, and I am here in Washington, D.C. Yael is in Tel Aviv, so we're connecting two of my favorite cities in the world. And we are here under unexpected circumstances, very quickly calling together a gathering to talk about the latest developments in Israeli politics. And when I was a kid and would get sick, one of the great positives of that was that you could stay home during the day and watch daytime dramas and daytime TV. And so, this is the substitute now in 2020 during this lockdown. We get the drama, sort of daytime television, but in Israeli politics. It has all the makings of an incredible soap opera. For the last 15 months, we have watched Israel go through incredible political gridlock, and we did numerous calls, Yael, and we've had numerous briefings in person in Washington and in Israel and all over the country, where we've said there's really only three ways out of that gridlock. Something had to give. Either the Likud had to get rid of Bibi, and they tried that in December, and he held on in the primary there, or Lieberman needed to cave on his core demand, which was not to sit with the ultra-Orthodox in a government, and he held firm, and that never happened. And we said the third thing was that Gantz could cave on his demand not to serve under a Bibi-led government. And it was only one of those three. Those were the only ways out of this, we kept saying over and over. So now we have a winner. We know how the gridlock ends. So Yael, can we start this call with you giving us just the basic facts? Tell us exactly what Benny Gantz has done. What has he agreed to, and what does it seem that the terms of this deal are?
I'll do my best, and Shabbat Shalom to everybody. It's nice to be with you from Tel Aviv. Extremely dramatic, 24 plus hours. I think that all of us in Israel are on the one hand trying to make sense of what happened and to understand the moves. And as Jeremy just asked, what is the deal that has been agreed on? And together with that, I wouldn't say on the other side because it goes side by side, really in a state of shock, of betrayal, of despair. So just to give you a sense of the feeling, at least, I think of people that I talk with, people in my family, people around me, not all of them have voted for blue and white, but I would say that the majority of them are eager to see Netanyahu leaving the house of the prime minister. So I'm giving this disclaimer because I want to say that a lot of the details of what has been agreed, if indeed something has been agreed, are still not known to us. What we do know is that yesterday, given after a chain of events that basically pushed the decision or the vote on the Speaker of the Knesset, and I don't want to give too much details, but I'll just say in general that we have a new Knesset that was sworn in. One of the first things that need to be decided is the Speaker of the House. The Speaker that was in place by law can continue to sit until he's been replaced by a vote. And what he's decided to do is not to bring the decision on replacing him to a vote. This then his reluctancy, which was pushed against by members of the majority of the House that didn't want to see him as the Speaker, they petitioned to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court then eventually ruled that the discussion on the Speaker needs to take place. So that was the push that sort of pushed all the system, pushed the parties, pushed the Knesset to make a decision. And yesterday afternoon, we were expecting what we call the anti-Bibi, anti-Netanyahu camp to come together around their alternative speaker of the Knesset, who was supposed to be Meir Cohen, former minister, against the nominee of Netanyahu, which was the sitting speaker, Yuli Edelstein. And what happened before the discussion is that Yuli Edelstein resigned, something that never happened before in the history of Israel. And thus there was a void for 1 hour and a half, maybe. Amir Peretz, being the eldest in the Knesset, sat as a replacement, but then the vote took place. And the surprising twist was that Benny Gantz came in, and instead of supporting Meir Cohen, who was supposed to be the nominee of his party, he nominated himself to the position and was voted and was basically supported by the right wing, by Likud and his own party. So he was elected to be the Speaker of the Knesset. He gave his speech, and we all understood that this means that he's going to go into a government with Netanyahu. His party partners, Yair Lapid and Bogi Yael, both of them are leaders of factions inside Blue and White, have announced that they are separating from Gantz, leaving him, basically taking away their 18 mandates, their 18 seats, leaving him with 17 seats. So he will go into this unity government with 17 seats. They won't join the government. They will keep their promise to their voters. They also had a press conference yesterday evening where they said that he, betrayed his voters and the trust that people gave in him. They were campaigning on a campaign that said that by no means will they sit in a government with a prime minister that is indicted. And since that yesterday night, basically when the situation is, we have Benny Gantz, Speaker of the House, probably for an interim period until he will be replaced by a member of Likud once the government will be sworn in.
I'm reading that could be Edelstein again, that he could come back.
Right. Most probably it will be Edelstein again. What do we know about the government? We know that Gantz doesn't have an agreement with Netanyahu, which begs the question, why was he in a rush? Right? Why was he in a rush to present himself? He could have agreed to Meir Cohen and still go into negotiations. But what we understand today is that he felt that there were no options for him. Maybe we'll talk about this more later, but just to describe the event. So now there is a government coming together. The agreement doesn't exist. We understand that Chosen, which is Benny Gantz's party, will get senior ministry positions. The right will get significantly less than what they've got. One of the most significant is the Ministry of Justice, which the right wants, but it will probably be in Gantz's hands.
So there are a lot of open questions about those kinds of specifics, which I know that people are going to be asking us in the Q&A part. We're going to try to just limit our opening now to maybe 15, 20 minutes and then open up for Q&A. And I know people will want to know, what does this mean for the Justice Ministry? What does it mean for other positions? But the bottom line, Yael, is that at this moment, there is no agreement. Nobody knows anything. We're all reading the same reports that, for instance, the Justice Ministry could be taken by Gantz's faction, which would be a very important good step for Israeli democracy, but we don't know any of that at this point. That's correct?
Right.
And the same goes also for political parties. There's been reports, for instance, that Amir Peretz might bring the small number of labor seats, maybe with Gesher, which left the 7-seat block of labor, Meretz Gesher, it left with 1 seat, and that might join along with Peretz into the government. But we don't know any of this, correct?
Right. I mean, this is. I mean, from, as you said, we're all reading the same reports and Twitter feeds and so on. I've read a report that Amir Peretz, the chairman of Labor, is calling his, his activists and telling them prepare the ground for us entering the government. We also saw MK Merav Michaeli from Labor announcing that by no means she will join the government. And there's a very interesting dynamic right now of single MKs and factions that are moving in different directions. So another example is member of Knesset Radir Kamal Marich, who spoke at the last J Street conference. She's from Benny Gantz's party. She represents the Druze community. She is one member of Knesset. She also said that she's not going to join the government. So she's not going to be part of the coalition, meaning that Gantz doesn't really have 17 seats going into the government. He has 16. And
so this is a good moment for a Hebrew lesson. The word is balagan. So for those who don't know Hebrew, is one of my favorite words that I learned when I lived in Israel, but it means chaos, essentially. And that's what we're in right now. We're in political balagan. Right.
And we have these molecules that are moving from, and joining together in clusters in different formations.
So, but the bottom line is that out of this balagan is likely to emerge some form of a government that brings together Netanyahu and Gantz and some formation. Could you walk through where that would leave, for instance, the right wing of the Gantz party, the folks who were never Netanyahu are more right wing than Gantz, but probably they're with, I guess, Yael. Would they stick with Yael in a faction and be in the opposition with the joint list, under the joint list being the largest faction in the opposition?
So the two famous right-wingers in Yael's party, Zvi Hauser and Yoaz Hendel, both of them were very close, worked very closely with Netanyahu. Hauser was the secretary of Netanyahu's government, and Hendel was Netanyahu's spokesperson. Both of them have very close relationships, but also a very bad experience with Netanyahu, and we're also very, very clear about running a campaign against corruption and against Netanyahu. They became very famous in the last few weeks and rounds because they came out before, they came out while there were speculations on what government is going to come, even before Gantz got the mandate from the president to negotiate a government. And they said, both of them said, by no means are we going to sit in a government that is supported by the joint list.
How are they going to feel sitting in opposition with Ayman Odeh as the leader of the opposition?
No, that's just the background. But now they've already yesterday filed a request to separate from Yael.
So the two of them will separate, and they might join Netanyahu.
Yes.
Despite being against Netanyahu, that's the whole reason they. Correct. Okay, good. So that adds to the balagan. Right. Excellent. And then you said that on the left side of things, obviously, Peretz might go one way with Orly and Merav Michaeli. Who's the other? And that would leave Merav and the Meretz members as part of the opposition.
Right.
Right. Well, now, before we open it up to the group for Q&A, I want to pursue two other lines of discussion with you. One, which I think is extraordinarily important, is the whole question of the Supreme Court and its role. And I just want to rewind the tape a little bit and just go over what happened in the last couple of weeks. And why is this, and if you could explain exactly what happened again, but why is this important? What is the principle at stake here? And for those of us who are concerned about annexation and issues related to the occupation, why is the Supreme Court's role in all of this of such concern to all of us.
So I'll give some of the details, and Jeremy, please jump in. And I always, when talking with somebody that has legal background, I always feel less secure when talking about courts and constitutions and so on. But the background is that I think, like in many countries, the right in Israel is really challenging, if I'm being polite to them, the balance between the legislative branch and the judicial branch. And they have an ideology that says that the majority needs to rule, and whatever the legislation decides, whatever the Knesset decides, whether it's annexation or whether it's any law on immigration or on anything, this is the decision that is to be considered, and the court shouldn't have the ability to overrule the Knesset. I mean, that's just the general background, really, for the simple tension, let's say. And throughout the last few years with an Israeli right-wing government, this has been a core issue of discussion, which is also why the right wants to hold the Ministry of Justice. I mean, this issue of there's a debate. The Knesset passed an override clause that will allow the Knesset to to override the override of the court, basically, and that's now discussed in the court. So I mean, that's the general background. What happened specifically with the issue of the Speaker of the House is that the Edelstein, he refused to hold the discussion on choosing the speaker. By the dry law, it's something that he could do. He's not obligated to hold the discussion in a way. I mean, he didn't go against the law. At the same time, he's sitting as a speaker, but he's not representing the majority of the Knesset. So it's against the will of the voter. And we had an election, and most of the people in the Knesset are not in favor of him. So it's anti-democratic. So there was a discussion here that was brought to the Supreme Court by Blue and White that petitioned against his reluctancy to hold the meeting and convene the assembly. And the court ruled against him at the end of the day. At the beginning, they gave him recommendation and they gave him
and then time. He resigned rather than actually do what the court told him to do. He resigned.
Right. And before the court even gave the ruling, major figures in the right wing in Israel, including the former Minister of Justice, said you shouldn't abide by the Supreme Court. If they will rule, you shouldn't accept their ruling.
And so that's Yael Shaked, for those who follow along with the scorebook at home. That's the Yael Shaked, former Minister of Justice view. And I'm sure it would be the view of Amir Ohana, the
yes.
Minister of Justice most recently. Right. So for those of us who care about Israeli democracy, the question of who is the justice minister and how do judicial appointments get processed and where are we headed in this balance of power with the courts and the Knesset is extraordinarily important to the future and the health of Israel's democracy. And so, I just flagged that this is one of those storylines to watch in the weeks ahead. Who does become the justice minister? What is the trend that then is set for how judges are appointed and the role of the judiciary? So let me move.
I will even tell you, I just want to, just one more sentence to say even more than that. In my household, before Edelstein, before the Supreme Court took its decision and Edelstein resigned, he basically did not abide by the law, right? I mean, the Speaker of the House gave all of us, citizens of Israel, legitimacy, basically, to do what we want and not to obey by the law. But I wanted to share that in my household, before that happened, my partner, and I hope you won't be upset with me that I am saying so, he said, let's, unity government made sense in a way, just to just move the system, and because of the corona and so on. After that, that was like a red line. And that after that, it was, it was clear that if Edelstein is doing this, then it also shows us what Netanyahu is going to do when the court rules against him. If the Speaker of the House cannot accept the ruling, then why should Netanyahu accept the ruling on the issues of his corruption? So that was like a very, very, I think that, all the alert signs went up. And because of that, even Gantz's decision and what he did is that more infuriating and confusing.
Right. And I think all of us in the United States who watch this government and the politics here in this moment of crisis and understand the tendencies of Donald Trump and understand they're similar to the tendencies of Bibi Netanyahu, and understand McConnell's focus on judges here parallels the focus on judges there. All of this is canary in the coal mine for American democracy, and the challenges that strong men, authoritarian types who disregard the institutions of democracy and the rule of law in a time of crisis see the opportunity to seize further power. And so I think this is a critical thing for us to keep an eye on, and is so important as one of the underlying themes of this whole crisis. I want to also just pick up a question that Peter Fry's asking in the chat here, which is, if you could give a sense of what might be motivating Benny Gantz. Peter refers to him as an honorable person, and I'm sure you do as well, and I certainly do, and his, service to the country, and sort of as an upstanding model public servant, and servant of the people and the state of Israel. To turn around and do this is really something. And I've read, Nahum Barnea, I've read Ben Caspita, I've read some, pop psychology, try to analyze what it is that's going on with Benny Gantz. But I'm curious if you can give a picture for people into some of the thinking there about Benny Gantz's thinking in doing this.
I'm looking at my phone because he posted a long post just a couple of hours ago, as his Shabbat posts, and I think I would point out on three things. One, I think at the end of the day, he didn't feel that he had options. He felt that the situation is clearly pushing towards a fourth election. And he didn't want to go to a fourth round of election. He felt, this is what he's also writing in the post, he felt that his partners were willing to go to another round of election. He and Gabi Ashkenazi, who is the other general that doesn't have a party, who just came by himself, he's saying he didn't want to go to a fourth election, which he thought would be detrimental to Israeli citizens in current circumstances, with the crisis that we're facing. Two, I saw polls that supposedly, I'm saying supposedly because I didn't fact check it, he saw before making the decision, and in those polls, the right bloc gained more seats, and his party lost seats. And there's also, but this is I think it's controversial because there's also polls about what his voters would like to see, which outcomes would they like him to join Netanyahu's government or not. I saw a poll that says that there was 40% that would prefer him going into the government with Netanyahu, but we've also seen a very consistent 70 to 80% support from his voters for the government that is supported by the joint list. So polls. I don't think that the polls are that.
And I would just point out, I think we're going to have a discussion on Monday with Dahlia Scheindlin. Is that right? With
right.
Yeah, she has a new poll, and so for those who want to dig in a little bit more, And I'll use this opportunity as a plug for our whole JStream, set of communications and activities on a regular basis. We're going to hold these kinds of webinars and Zoom chats, and we'll be doing all sorts of other types of programming. So keep an eye out for the JStream emails, and also please forward them on to other folks who may be interested in looking for more information in this time. But on Monday, we're having a conversation with Dahlia about a new poll that she's going to be releasing.
Right, exactly about that. So I'm saying he didn't want another election, and he thought that that's the only option. B, we already know that he wasn't willing to form a minority government, which also, I mean, to be honest, doesn't seem like the best option under Corona, right? We're in very special circumstances, I have to say. I mean, it does make sense. Third is him, what we've known before, he's the only one of the cockpit, that's how it's called, the leadership of blue and white, that hasn't served in the government. So he's the only one who has the interest of, not of having some government experience. And the fourth, and I think probably, probably a very honest description of him, I think that he doesn't want to be the prime minister.
Isn't the agreement that he is going to become the prime minister in 18 months?
And then 18 months. So he'll have what we call in Hebrew chafifa. I think in English it's when somebody trains, the veteran trains the new person.
The stage, an internship.
Yeah. So he'll get 18 months to learn the job. Netanyahu will get to shoulder most of the responsibility for the crisis. And if he'll have the right, the strong ministries, and can prevent in the Knesset legislation that we're all afraid of, so he can make a case for his voters. I think that's his calculation.
The good news is that in the chat we're getting real-time Google Translate help here, and some people are saying hafifa is overlap, and others are saying a handover period. I trust Susan and Debbie have both said overlap, so we'll go with overlap for that. The other thing that I think you mentioned, that he hasn't had the experience of serving in government, and that's an issue and that's a factor. But some of the commentators are writing what he also doesn't have an experience with is being personally burned by Netanyahu. Both Lapid and Yael served in government under Netanyahu and ended up getting chewed up and spat out, right? And I think that is true for Hendel and Hauser, and all the rest of these folks they've gone through this gauntlet of experience of serving with him, and they would never consider doing it. It's very personal for them. Whereas for Gantz, it just isn't that personal yet, right? He hasn't had the experience he's about to have, which is serving under him and then getting completely lied to and misled and used. And we'll revisit this again next year and see just how
he will be joining, a very respectful, honorable group of people that include Shimon Peres.
It's a very long list at this point. Ehud Barak.
And Ehud Barak.
Yeah.
And Amir Peretz. So.
And I see that Nancy, just if you want to, you have to click on the chat to open it up. I see that there's a question of how do you see all of the posts on the chat, and everybody should be chatting to, hopefully, I guess we can open that up to see to everyone. I don't know, that's up to the people running the call, not me. So I see some questions that have been chatted over to me. Ken Bob is pointing out that there is a possible positive side to all of this, which is that in fact a blue and white justice minister would at least ensure that Bibi's trial goes ahead. That's another piece of this, a justice minister who is not going to cave in on this. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So let me switch to the final gear for the conversation, and Phyllis Snyder raises this, which is, for J Street, obviously our focus continues to be on occupation, annexation, the Trump peace sham, what happens between now and January 20th of 2021, when we hope there'll be a new American government. So what does all of this mean about the prospects for annexation under an emergency government? Where is Gantz? You know as well as I do that Gantz tried to have it both ways during the course of the campaign. On the one hand, he said the Jordan Valley should remain, quote unquote, under Israeli control, perpetual control, but that any annexation which he would support, he would only support it if it was done with international coordination, and that's with the Jordanians and neighbors and others, which is never going to happen. So he essentially laid out a null set, that sure, I'd support it, but only if we get the seal of approval from the neighbors, which is not realistic. So what does that mean for the Kushner plan? What does it mean for the Friedman annexation map, which, in my opinion, if Bibi had won and formed a government and there were no corona, my prediction was April or May, Kushner would roll out the map with Friedman and Dermer and the rest of them drawing it up, and the Israeli government would move ahead with annexation. That, to me, seems to be off the table in the near future, but I'm curious what your take is on that.
No, I agree. I mean, I had a call with Barak Ravid, who is an Israeli journalist that I think a lot of us appreciate, and he's a diplomatic correspondent, so he follows both the internal politics, but also the international file with focus on the Palestinian-Israeli issue, and has been also very close in reporting, at least on the developments in the White House and how they're promoting their plan and so on. And he said, he gave this whole review where he said, well, if we weren't in the situation that we are now today, then I would say that we were towards annexation. But everything we thought about and were worried about in terms of the fast pace in which annexation can be rolled and implemented because of the support of the White House is now put on freeze. And I think that's my sense, that I'm seeing that my internet connection is unstable, so I don't know if you can hear me.
We're still good.
Okay, so
it's more stable than the Israeli political system.
I think it's, yes, although so I think it's not on the table right now. There's bigger fish to fry, obviously. But I also saw that one of Gantz's demands is to have a veto vote on anything that has to do with annexation. So I think I would assume that means that his desire is to stop it. But but also I don't know for sure to say. I should.
Right. I think where you and I have always, as we've tried to advise people what to think, what we've said is that Benny Gantz is sort of the prototypical commander for Israel's security. I mean, he's sort of the prototypical person who served in a very high capacity for several decades. And we know that 80% of his colleagues who like him and respect him and we believe think like him are so deeply opposed to the concept of annexation. And it's always given us, a sense of comfort that most of them felt that he is sort of on their page. And so in terms of the key issues that we've cared about, even though in the course of political campaigns, Gantz has made statements about the West Bank and annexation and the Jordan Valley that unsettle us, I think you and I have tried to maintain at least the hope and a realistic assessment that in his deepest thoughts, where he really lands is probably in a similar place to the other commanders in recognizing the tragedy that would befall Israel if they go down that path. And so, to me, it's a little bit of comfort to have him in the defense ministry, if that's where he ends up. I do think that there are, steps that were being taken by somebody like a Naftali Bennett or even by a Lieberman that he would not take. And there might be a slight improvement in some of our issues. And I think Ashkenazi as a foreign minister, similarly, it's a better situation than some of the other people. If that's where we end up, it is better than where we've been. That would be my assessment.
Yes, it will be better, and I think we will, we will definitely encourage, I think, whoever is in the government, and definitely whoever will hold the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whether it is Gantz or Ashkenazi, to really put the relationship with the U.S. And in particular the relationship with the Democratic Party, and at the head of their agenda, and trying to create some distancing from Netanyahu and that, and to show that there is an alternative an alternative leadership in Israel that is willing to do things differently.
Yeah, and I think that we have hopefully we have 10 months between now and a new administration here, and that window for the right wing is critical, and they will want to try, even during Corona or just after Corona, they will want to try to seize and grab their victory in their land before a Biden government here comes in, and then you really have a U.S. returning to opposition to these kinds of things. So I think these 10 months are critical, and having Gantz and Ashkenazi in the government, in those posts, it's better than having, let's say, Bennett and Israel Katz, running these two ministries, and also somebody at Justice. In the chat, someone is asking. Actually, I'm losing track of what's on Facebook Live, what's in a chat, what's coming as a question. Just too many inputs coming across my screen. But somebody asked, why, if one analyzes that Netanyahu's whole objective in this is to avoid trial, and he needs someone in the Justice Ministry who sees eye to eye with him, why would he give up the Justice Ministry in this process? Do you have any thoughts on that question?
I think that Netanyahu is not afraid of a trial. I think his plan is to go to trial, and his plan is to make the best out of it, and to continue his campaign of, I'm the victim and the whole system is against me. What he needs is to be in the seat of the prime minister. That's what he needs. The trial can take many, many years. As long as he's prime minister, he's not going to jail. So he can still, Netanyahu is very good in extending, prolonging, kicking the can down the road. And I think that's what he's, until he comes up with the next solution. So while sure, he would want to have the Ministry of Justice, but also I think that giving the Ministry of Justice to the settlers, to the settler right, which is now smaller than it used to be, so they don't have the negotiation power that they used to have. And for Netanyahu, I think that's a very good outcome, because he's not happy with them having the ability to pressure him so much.
So first of all, it's great to see that not only are we doing Hebrew lessons and learning about Balagan and Hafifa, but we're also doing Zoom lessons. So people are learning that in the chat, if you click the little blue box, you can change to the everyone setting as opposed to all panelists, so that your chat is able to be seen. So this is a learning call, not only about Israeli politics, but so many other topics. I want to pick up on a theme that runs through a lot of the comments on various different platforms right now, the joint list. I think that for many of us who look to the future of Israel's democracy and for hope for the future of Israel, the cooperation between rational center, left, center even Israelis and the Arab community, the citizens of Israel who happen to be Palestinian, that cooperation and the ability to work functionally and normally together in politics is the key to the future. I mean, that's the only way that you really can see the country fully on track in the decades ahead. So what does all of this mean? Where does the joint list come out of all of this? The last year and a half have been fascinating, right? And in the big picture, they're a political player, and they, you and I have noted that they get interviewed on Israeli TV to comment on politics as politicians, which is just a wonderful thing, right? It is not just simply as a, token person commenting on their community with their limited hat, but really as a player in politics, and they've played a role in the politics. But then at the end of the day, they still were not seen to be, legitimate enough by the blue and white world to really be a potential partner in a government. So where does all this leave them in your view, and leave this whole question of Jewish and Arab political cooperation for the future?
Yeah, so I'll start with the personal again. I'm involved in a group that is called the Fellowship Alliance. The Alliance.
Showing the importance of branding, you have to remember the name of your organization.
But in any case, it's a group it's a mixed group of Israelis, and we're Zionist lefties, let's say, and Jews and Arabs that are, all of them are supportive of the joint list, and in different factions of the list. So some of them could be Hadash, and others could be Balad, and the reason of us coming together is really trying to work on the Jewish-Arab partnership from a political lens and making it possible in the future, understanding that it's a long-term project to have such partnership that today seems not possible, not legitimate, and so on. And I do want to start by saying that where we are today in terms of, Jeremy, if you said that Arab MKs are interviewed as politicians, it's just one example of this. But where we are in terms of the discourse, the fact that Arab-Jewish partnership is talked about, that it's debated about. I mean, I don't want to push aside or to ignore in any way the massive racism and Netanyahu's campaign and billboards and how horrible it is. But nobody would have imagined a year ago that this discussion in Israel will be where it is at, and that 70 to 80% of blue and white voters that are centric voters would be in favor of a government that is supported by the joint list. So I just want to say that that's huge. At the same time, and I come back to my group, yesterday, we have our WhatsApp group, and the Arab members of the group felt horrible, felt like it was a slap in the face, because the joint list recommended Gantz. For the first time, even Balad, which is the nationalist faction within the joint list, recommended him, hoping, seeing this as a historical opportunity to get rid of Netanyahu, basically. And they were ignored, sort of pushed aside, and in a way you can say that. And that was, and I think that yesterday the reactions and the emotions in the group were very strong by the Arab members, but also by those of us who had hoped that there indeed could be an alternative government. And I don't know if to say that we had too much hopes from Gantz, but it definitely felt like a betrayal. And one of my reactions was to say, it's not a slap in the face in a way, because the joint list represents its voters. And what Ayman Odeh, as the leader of the joint list, and his fellow MKs are doing, they're doing for their people. They're not doing it for Gantz's government. They're not doing it for anybody else. And I was pleased to see today that Ayman Odeh, the leader of the joint list, that's more or less what his message was, his Friday message, where he said, the Gantz didn't betray the Arabs, he betrayed his voters. We are here to represent our people. Which I think is a very, it's not only a right message, it's also a real one, and the joint list, as you said, will be the biggest faction in the opposition. Being in the opposition in Israel doesn't give you a lot of power, especially in the last 10 years. I have to say it's a very dark place to be, but they will be leading committees. Member of Knesset Aida Tuma Suleiman is going to lead the Labor and Welfare Committee, which makes her in a very good position to support, not only her constituency, but all of Israel in this financial crisis and that we are facing. So, I mean, the election themselves created good outcomes for the joint list. Yes.
Just a quick question, because somebody asked this. Even with the speakership going back to Edelstein, somebody like Ida will still be a chair of a committee, or will that change when the speakership goes over to Edelstein?
The speaker doesn't matter. If it will change, I don't know, but it wouldn't change because of the speaker.
Great. So and then just numbers wise, I see, Ken is asking whether if Lapid and Yael stay together, would that make them the largest faction? Is that one of the incentives that might hold Lapid and the Telem faction of Yael together?
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, they have 18.
Yeah.
And if Hauser and Handel are leaving, then they have 16. And so, yeah, it's neck to neck. And, and Netanyahu might be able to steal another MK to the government to give him a ministry or something. But it will be, yes, it will be. And who knows, maybe there was a question also about Lieberman. Where's Lieberman in all this?
Right.
He, for now, although I understood that Gantz was hoping that he will join the government as well, but he for now has declared that he's not going to join the government by any means. And it will be very interesting because Lapid, Yael, and Lieberman can now maybe create some, party together. It will be interesting to see how they will play their cards.
Well, this is why this is the never-ending drama and soap opera that will continue for the weeks ahead, allowing us to continue to have calls like this that will fill everybody in on the latest developments, and we can, continue to watch the balagan and watch the developments together. So I want to thank Yael. It's about to be Shabbat, and the sun may already be down in the sky. I'm not sure, but it's getting close. And want to wish a Shabbat Shalom to you and your family and everybody, in our community, and all those who are under the shadow right now of the coronavirus, and hope that everybody's doing okay over there. I say the same to everybody in the J Street community. My best wishes, all of J Street's best wishes to all of you for safe and healthy Shabbat and weekend, and stay inside, stay distant physically, and keep yourself safe. Please do continue to sign in to our JStream programming. There's a web page on our website that lists out not only upcoming events, but also the things that have already happened, and people can share those and use them in any way you'd like, and hope that that's of use to people in these difficult times. So thank you again, Yael. Shabbat Shalom to everybody, and we will see you next week.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.